A cowboy freed a captive Apache woman. That day, she said, "You will be my husband." The sun was just beginning its climb above the endless plains, casting long golden shadows over the dry grass that swayed gently in the morning breeze. The wind carried the scent of earth and dust, mingled with the faint smell of smoke from a distant campfire. On a lonely trail that wound through rocky hills and scattered trees, a cowboy rode slowly, his horse's hooves making a soft rhythm on the hard-packed earth. He was a man used to the silence of the land, his life shaped by long days under the sun and long nights under the stars. His name was Jacob, a tall, broad-shouldered man with weathered hands, a sunburned face, and eyes that had seen more than most men could ever imagine. Jacob was not the kind of man who sought adventure. Adventure always seemed to find him. But he believed in fairness, in doing what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. As he rode, Jacob's keen eyes scanned the horizon. He had learned to notice the smallest details, the slight disturbance of grass that hinted at an animal's path, the broken branch that suggested someone had passed through recently. And today, something was different. There was a sense of unease in the air, a tension that prickled at his instincts. A few miles ahead, he noticed footprints on the soft earth near a dry creek bed. They were human footprints, and they told a troubling story. The prints were uneven, some deeper than others, and they showed signs of a struggle. Jacob's heart tightened. He had heard of travelers gone missing in these parts, caught by bandits or other dangers, but seeing the signs firsthand was something else entirely. He urged his horse forward, moving quietly but deliberately. The trail led him into a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side, casting long shadows over the rocky ground. The air grew cooler here, and the silence was almost deafening. Jacob's senses sharpened. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, was magnified. Then, as he rounded a bend, he saw something that made him halt in his tracks. A small camp had been hastily abandoned. A fire, still smoldering, sent up thin wisps of smoke. Scattered around were items of clothing, a few tools, and a broken rope. But most striking of all was a woman, bound and sitting on the ground, her head bowed and her body trembling. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest. He had never seen anyone in such a state, and yet there was something remarkable about her. Even in captivity, she carried herself with dignity. Her dark hair fell over her shoulders in tangled waves, and her eyes, though wary and fearful, shone with intelligence and strength. She was young, perhaps no older than 20, but there was a maturity in her expression that spoke of hardships endured and courage forged through adversity. Jacob dismounted slowly, careful not to startle her. He knew that sudden movements or loud words could frighten her further. "Hey there," he said softly, keeping his voice low and steady. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The woman flinched but did not speak. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were whispering a prayer or trying to steady herself. Jacob could see the rope chafing her wrists, the bruises on her arms and shoulders. Whoever had done this to her had been cruel, careless, and dangerous. Jacob's mind raced. He needed to act quickly, but he also needed a plan. He scanned the canyon. A few men, likely the ones who had captured her, were nearby. He could see their figures in the shadows, their voices carrying faintly over the rocks as they argued or laughed among themselves. They had not noticed him yet, and he intended to keep it that way. He moved closer to the woman, crouching slightly to seem smaller and less threatening. "My name is Jacob," he said gently. "I'm going to help you. Can you stand?" The woman hesitated. Her body was stiff from fear, her muscles sore from hours, maybe days, of being tied up. Slowly, she nodded, her dark eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of hope there, fragile but real. Jacob carefully loosened the ropes around her wrists, working methodically so as not to cause her pain. When the ropes fell away, she rubbed her wrists and flexed her fingers, still trembling but beginning to feel some relief. "Thank you," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. It was soft, melodic, and carried a tone of both gratitude and exhaustion. Jacob gave a small nod. "We need to move. They'll be back soon and it won't be safe here." He offered her his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her grip was surprisingly strong, given everything she had endured. They started down the canyon carefully, keeping to the shadows and moving slowly to avoid detection. The cowboy's experience in the wild proved invaluable. He knew the paths that would give them cover, the small streams where they could refill their water, and the hidden hollows where they could rest without being seen. As they moved, Jacob noticed how alert the woman was. Every sound made her pause, every movement made her tense. Yet despite her fear, there was a resilience in her, a refusal to be broken. He admired that quietly. Most people would have given up, surrendered to despair, but not her. She was determined, strong, and brave, qualities that he respected deeply. After several hours, they reached a small clearing where the sun's rays broke through the trees. Jacob led the woman to a shaded spot near a trickling stream. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, her eyes scanning the surroundings, never letting her guard down completely. Jacob knelt beside her, pulling out a small canteen of water. He offered it to her, and she drank cautiously, then handed it back. "You're safe now," he said. "I'll make sure of it." The woman's eyes softened slightly. She was beginning to trust him, though cautiously. Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice steady but curious. Jacob paused. It was not an easy question. He was a man who had lived by his own code, who had seen cruelty and suffering everywhere he went. Yet in that moment the answer was simple. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "No one deserves what happened to you, and I don't walk away when someone needs help." She looked at him, studying his face as if trying to read his soul. Then she nodded. No words could express the relief she felt, but the gesture spoke volumes. She had been rescued, but more than that, she had found someone she could trust in a world that had shown her very little kindness. The rest of the afternoon was a careful balance of rest and movement. Jacob knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. He needed to lead her to a safer area, somewhere far from those who had captured her. As they traveled, he shared small stories of the land, of the animals, the weather, and the people he had met. It was not meant to entertain, but to distract, to make the journey less frightening, to remind her that life could be more than fear and suffering. The woman listened quietly, her eyes brightening with each story. She even managed a small smile when he described a stubborn mule he had once tried to ride, only to be thrown into a mud puddle. For a brief moment, laughter replaced fear, and the air between them felt lighter, almost normal. As night fell, they found a hidden grove to rest. Jacob made a small fire, careful not to let the smoke rise too high. They ate in silence, the woman's eyes reflecting the firelight, a mixture of wariness and gratitude. Jacob kept watch, scanning the shadows, alert for any sign of danger. Before they slept, the woman finally spoke again. "I don't know your name," she said softly. "Jacob," he replied. "And you?" "Ahuli," she said. It was a name that carried the music of her people, the strength of her heritage. Jacob nodded, remembering it carefully. Names were important. They carried identity, history, and pride. He would remember hers always. They settled to rest, each alert but grateful for the brief safety. Jacob felt a strange sense of connection, a bond that went beyond words. Ahuli had endured so much, yet she remained strong. He knew this was only the beginning of a journey filled with dangers, trust, and perhaps something more. But for now, the immediate challenge had been met. She was free, and she was alive. The night passed slowly, the sounds of the wild surrounding them. The whisper of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, the gentle flow of the stream. Jacob thought about the day, about the risks he had taken, and about the courage of the young woman beside him. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that some bonds, once formed, could not be broken. And as he drifted into a light sleep, he felt a quiet determination settle over him. Whatever lay ahead, he would protect her. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when Jacob and Ahuli rose from their hidden grove. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and fresh grass. They had slept lightly, each listening for the faintest sound of movement in the distance. Jacob's hand rested near the hilt of his knife, ready to protect, while Ahuli's eyes were wide and alert, scanning the surrounding trees. Though she had been freed, fear still clung to her like a shadow. Jacob understood this. He knew that freedom meant nothing if danger still followed closely behind. They moved quietly, following a narrow trail that wound through the hills and valleys. Jacob led, keeping to the shadows and low paths where the sun's rays could not reveal their presence. Ahuli followed closely, her bare feet sometimes brushing against roots and rocks, her breathing shallow as she tried not to stumble. Despite her weariness, there was a determination in her step, a refusal to give in to exhaustion or despair. Jacob glanced back at her several times, silently noting the way she moved. He had rescued her, but he now realized that she was no helpless girl. She was clever, quick, and brave, qualities that would be vital in the journey ahead. Hours passed, and the land slowly changed. The dry plains gave way to thicker brush and clusters of trees, offering more cover and opportunities to rest. Jacob paused near a small stream to let Ahuli drink. She cupped the water in her hands and brought it to her lips, her dark eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was no need for words. They both understood the importance of small comforts in a dangerous world. "Not far now," Jacob said quietly, more to himself than to her. "If we can reach the ridge before nightfall, we'll have a better chance of staying ahead of them." Ahuli nodded, but her face remained tense. She had endured fear before, but this was different. She had been a captive, stripped of her freedom, and now she had to trust someone she barely knew. And yet, Jacob's calm presence, his quiet confidence, offered her a strange sense of safety. Slowly, she began to relax, just enough to notice the beauty around them. The gentle rustle of leaves, the distant song of a bird, the way the sunlight glinted off the stream's water. As they moved along the trail, the sound of voices reached them faintly through the trees. Jacob froze, signaling Ahuli to stay silent. He crouched behind a low boulder, peering through the brush. A small group of men were moving down the opposite trail, their shadows stretching long in the morning sun. Jacob's heart beat faster. These were likely the ones who had captured Ahuli. He knew that confrontation was dangerous. They were few, and he was only one man, but he also knew that hiding would not keep them safe forever. Jacob whispered instructions to Ahuli. "We need to circle around them. Stay low, follow me exactly, and don't make a sound." Ahuli nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She trusted him completely, and he could see the flicker of courage returning to her eyes. Together, they crept through the underbrush, moving with the precision of people who had no choice but to survive. The men passed by, oblivious to the presence of the two hidden figures, and Jacob exhaled quietly once they were out of sight. For the rest of the morning, they continued their journey, always alert, always watching. They crossed rocky ridges, waded through shallow streams, and navigated dense patches of brush. Jacob occasionally glanced at Ahuli, offering small gestures of reassurance. A nod, a gentle smile, a brief pause to let her catch her breath. She began to speak more, sharing bits of her story, fragments of her life before captivity. Her words were careful, measured, as if she were testing whether Jacob could be trusted with her truth. "I come from a village far to the east," she said finally, her voice soft. "My family, they were taken from me. I was captured while gathering water." She paused, the memories weighing heavily on her. Jacob did not speak, only listened. Sometimes words were not needed. Understanding could be shown through attention and presence alone. Jacob nodded gently. "I know it's hard," he said. "But you're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." Ahuli looked at him, and for the first time that day there was a spark of hope in her eyes. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. As the sun reached its peak, they paused in the shade of a large oak tree. Jacob inspected the land around them, noting the paths that led away from the canyon and the small valleys that offered concealment. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and treacherous. They were not yet free from danger. But for now, they could rest, eat, and plan the next steps. Jacob offered Ahuli a small portion of dried meat and bread, which she accepted gratefully. The act of sharing food, so simple and human, strengthened their bond. "Tomorrow," Jacob said after a while, "we'll reach a place where the land opens up and we can travel faster, but we need to be careful. They'll be looking for you." Ahuli nodded, biting into her bread thoughtfully. "I don't understand why you're helping me," she said after a pause. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" Jacob looked at her, considering his words. "Because it's right," he said finally. "Because someone had to, because no one deserves to be treated that way. And because I can't ignore it." Her eyes softened and she looked away, focusing on the stream. There was a silence between them, comfortable and filled with unspoken understanding. The afternoon passed slowly, with careful navigation and frequent pauses. Jacob taught Ahuli small ways to move quietly, to watch the land for signs of danger, and to listen to the sounds of animals and humans alike. She proved to be quick to learn, her eyes sharp and alert. Jacob was impressed by her intelligence and her willingness to adapt. She was no ordinary girl. She was someone with spirit, courage, and strength. By late afternoon, the land began to rise again, and Jacob led Ahuli toward a ridge that overlooked a wide valley below. From this vantage point, they could see far in every direction. It was a dangerous but necessary stop. They needed to know where they could go next, where safety might be found, and whether any signs of pursuit remained. Jacob pointed to the valley below. "See those trees near the river? That's our next target. We can move fast through the riverbed and the trees will give us cover. But we must be careful, stay close to me and follow my lead." Ahuli nodded, her jaw set with determination. She felt exhausted, her body aching from the day's journey, yet she also felt a sense of purpose. For the first time in many days, she felt like she was no longer completely helpless. She had a companion, someone who believed in her, and that made all the difference. As they began to descend the ridge, a sudden noise made them both freeze. A branch snapped somewhere above them, and a bird startled into flight. Jacob held up a hand, signaling Ahuli to stop. They crouched low, hearts pounding, eyes scanning the trees. But it was only a deer, startled by their movement. Both exhaled in relief, their tension easing slightly. They continued down the ridge carefully, the shadows lengthening as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Jacob found a small hollow near the base of the ridge where they could rest for the night, protected by trees and brush. He made a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. They ate again, this time sharing what little water and food they had left. As night fell, the world around them changed. The valley below became a shadowy expanse, filled with mysterious sounds of nocturnal creatures. Ahuli's eyes reflected the firelight, her expression a mix of fatigue, fear, and something else, trust. Jacob kept watch, scanning the darkness, always alert. He understood that the safety of the night was temporary and that the journey ahead would demand courage, skill, and unity. Finally, Ahuli spoke softly. "Jacob, why did you come to save me? You could have ignored me, walked away, but you didn't." Jacob looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because it matters," he said, "because someone had to care, and because I couldn't leave you." There was a pause, a moment where words were not enough. Ahuli looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the honesty, the courage, and the determination in his eyes. For the first time since her captivity, she felt a fragile sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this journey and reclaim her life. The fire crackled quietly, and the stars began to appear in the sky above. Jacob and Ahuli settled close to each other, not speaking, just resting and listening to the sounds of the wild. Trust was growing between them, a silent bond forged through danger, survival, and mutual respect. They were not yet safe, not yet free from the challenges that lay ahead, but they had each other, and that made all the difference. The night was long, filled with quiet vigilance and unspoken understanding. Jacob knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, more trails to navigate, more dangers to avoid. But he also knew that together, he and Ahuli could face whatever came their way. And somewhere deep inside, he began to realize that this journey was about more than survival. It was about courage, connection, and the quiet beginnings of trust that could grow into something far greater. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting soft golden light. Across the valley, Jacob and Ahuli had slept lightly, each remaining alert even in the safety of their hidden hollow. The night had been long, filled with the subtle sounds of wildlife and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Jacob had kept watch until the first faint light appeared, and Ahuli, sensing his vigilance, had felt a quiet sense of safety she had not known in a long time. Though their journey was far from over, the night had strengthened their bond, built not on words but on shared understanding and trust. They set out early, moving carefully through the valley below, following the stream that Jacob had identified as their path to safer terrain. The water ran clear and cool, reflecting the sunlight like a ribbon of glass. Ahuli stepped lightly, her bare feet brushing the rocks, her body still weary from the previous day's journey. Jacob noticed her exhaustion but admired the determination in her steps. She had been through unimaginable hardship, yet she moved forward, refusing to give up. As they traveled, the land gradually shifted from open plains to gentle hills dotted with shrubs and small trees. The terrain offered them better cover, but it also meant they had to be more vigilant. Jacob taught Ahuli how to move quietly, how to watch for signs of other people, and how to read the land for danger. She listened intently, absorbing every instruction, practicing each movement with care. Her natural intelligence and quick reflexes made her a fast learner, and Jacob found himself impressed by her resilience and adaptability. Around midday, they reached a small ridge overlooking a hidden valley below. Jacob stopped, signaling Ahuli to stay close and silent. Through the trees, he could see smoke rising in the distance, possibly another camp, perhaps people searching for her. His mind raced as he considered their options. Moving directly toward the smoke would be dangerous, but ignoring it entirely could lead them into more danger. He chose a careful path along the ridge, moving slowly and keeping low to avoid being seen. Ahulai followed closely, her trust in Jacob growing with each careful step. Though she had been frightened when he first appeared, his calm confidence and protective presence had given her hope. She had begun to realize that he was not just a rescuer, he was someone she could rely on. The thought was both comforting and strange, for she had not felt safe or connected to anyone in a long time. As they navigated the ridge, they encountered a narrow ravine that cut through the hills. Jacob tested the path first, finding stable footholds and pointing out loose rocks that could be dangerous. Ahulai followed, carefully placing each step, her hands brushing against the rough stone for balance. The ravine was steep and treacherous, but it offered cover from the smoke in the distance. Once they reached the other side, they paused to rest, crouching behind a large boulder to catch their breath. "Are you okay?" Jacob asked quietly, glancing at Ahulai. She nodded, though her face was pale and tired. "Yes," she said softly, "I am stronger than I feel." Jacob smiled faintly. "That's good, you'll need that strength. The journey isn't over yet." They continued through the hidden valley, the sun climbing higher in the sky and warming their backs. Along the way, Ahulai began to share more of her story. She spoke of her village, of her family, and of the life she had lived before captivity. Each word was careful, yet filled with emotion. Jacob listened without interrupting, offering silent support through his presence. He could sense the weight of her memories, the grief and fear that had been imposed upon her, and the courage it took to speak them aloud. "They took everything from me," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "My home, my family, everything I knew, and yet I survived." "I had to," Jacob nodded solemnly. "You're strong, you've survived when most would not. That's why you're here with me today." There was a pause, a quiet moment of reflection as they moved along the stream. Ahulai's eyes lingered on the water, watching the sunlight dance across its surface. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond fear and captivity, a life of freedom, safety, and perhaps even companionship. The thought was new and fragile, but it gave her hope. By late afternoon, they reached a hidden grove, sheltered by tall trees and thick underbrush. Jacob motioned for Ahulai to rest while he scouted the area. The grove offered cover and safety, a place to spend the night without fear of being discovered. Jacob moved carefully, circling the perimeter and listening for any signs of danger. He returned a short while later, satisfied that the grove was secure. Ahulai sat quietly, her legs stretched out before her, her hands resting on her knees. "This place, it feels safe," she said softly. "For the first time, I feel safe." Jacob nodded, sitting beside her. "It's temporary, but it's enough for now. We'll rest tonight, and tomorrow we'll continue." They shared a small meal, simple bread and dried meat, and the act of eating together created a sense of normalcy that had been absent for so long. The conversation remained light, focused on small observations of the land and the animals around them. Jacob spoke of birds, deer, and the patterns of the clouds. Ahulai listened, her eyes brightening as she absorbed the knowledge. It was not just survival skills, it was a way of reconnecting with the world, a step toward reclaiming her life. As night approached, Jacob built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. The flames cast warm light over their faces, highlighting the exhaustion and determination in Ahulai's expression. She watched the fire silently, her thoughts turning inward. She had trusted Jacob from the moment he freed her, but now in the quiet of the grove she felt a deeper connection. There was something about him, his calm, his courage, his unwavering presence, that made her feel protected, understood, and valued. Jacob sensed the change in her demeanor. "You're thinking about more than just the journey," he said quietly. "Don't worry, we'll take it one step at a time. For now, rest." Ahulai nodded, but she couldn't stop herself from speaking. "Jacob, thank you for everything. For saving me, for keeping me safe. I don't know how I would have survived without you." Jacob's eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. "You would have survived," he said softly. "You are strong, Ahulai. You have courage and skill. I only helped guide you." She smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and admiration in her expression. "Still, you risked yourself for me. That matters. It matters more than you know." The night grew deeper, filled with the quiet sounds of the forest. Crickets sang their song, leaves rustled in the breeze, and the stream whispered gently nearby. Jacob and Ahuli sat close to each other, not speaking, simply observing the world around them. There was a sense of peace in the grove, a brief respite from the dangers of the outside world. As the hours passed, Ahuli began to speak of her dreams and hopes for the future. She imagined returning to her village, reconnecting with her family, and living a life free from fear. Jacob listened intently, offering encouragement and guidance where he could. He shared some of his own thoughts, not of love, but of respect for her courage and admiration for her resilience. Each word, each shared moment, strengthened the bond between them, creating a foundation of trust that would carry them through the challenges ahead. Eventually, the conversation turned to silence, a comfortable quiet filled with unspoken understanding. Jacob remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the shadows, but his presence alone was reassuring to Ahuli. She felt safe, not just physically but emotionally as well. For the first time since her captivity, she allowed herself to feel hope, trust, and even a sense of connection to another human being. Before they slept, Ahuli turned to Jacob with a serious expression. "Jacob, when this is over, when we are truly safe, will you stay with me? Will you help me rebuild my life?" Jacob looked at her, understanding the weight of her words. He did not answer immediately, choosing instead to meet her gaze with honesty. "We'll face each day as it comes," he said finally, "but I promise I will not leave you." "You are not alone, Ahuli. We'll get through this together." She nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. The firelight reflected in her eyes, giving them a warmth and brightness that had been absent for so long. They settled down to rest, leaning against the thick trunk of a tree, and allowed themselves to sleep, knowing that the journey ahead would demand strength, courage, and unwavering trust. The night passed quietly, the stars twinkling above like distant promises of hope. Jacob thought about the path they had taken, the dangers they had avoided, and the bond that had formed between them. Ahuli, too, reflected on the journey, feeling a strange mix of fear, gratitude, and something else, an emotion she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. It was a feeling of connection, respect, and perhaps even a hint of affection. When the first light of dawn touched the grove, they rose together, ready to continue their journey. Jacob led the way, confident in the path ahead, while Ahuli followed, her trust in him unwavering. Together they moved forward, two souls bound by courage, survival, and a growing understanding that their lives were now intertwined. For the first time since her captivity, Ahuli allowed herself to believe in a future where she was free, safe, and perhaps even loved. And Jacob, walking beside her, understood that their journey was about more than escape. It was about connection, respect, and the quiet beginnings of something that neither of them could yet fully name, but both could feel growing within their hearts. The morning sun rose slowly over the grove, bathing the forest in soft, warm light. Birds sang in the branches, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves. Jacob stirred first, as he always did, scanning the area carefully for any signs of danger. The night had been quiet, but he knew that safety was always temporary. The world outside their hidden grove was unpredictable, full of both beauty and danger. Ahuli woke shortly after, stretching and rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Her body was sore from the journey, but she felt stronger than the day before. Each step they had taken, each challenge they had faced, had built her confidence and resilience. She looked at Jacob, still alert and protective, and felt a wave of gratitude and something deeper, something she could not yet fully name. He had risked everything to save her, guided her through danger, and treated her with respect and kindness when the world had shown her little but cruelty. They prepared to leave the grove, gathering their few belongings and making sure the path ahead was clear. Jacob led the way, moving with careful precision through the trees and over the uneven terrain. Ahuli followed, her steps sure and deliberate. She had learned much from him, the quiet ways of the land, how to move without drawing attention, and how to trust her instincts. The lessons had become second nature, and she felt capable and prepared, ready to face whatever lay ahead. As they traveled, the landscape opened into a wide valley filled with tall grass, gentle hills, and a winding river that sparkled in the sunlight. Jacob slowed his pace, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. From this vantage point, they could see far in every direction, and it offered both opportunity and risk. The beauty of the valley was almost overwhelming. a stark contrast to the fear and hardship they had endured. For Ahuli, it was a reminder of freedom, of the life she had been denied and was now beginning to reclaim. Jacob led her toward a cluster of trees near the river, knowing that the shade would provide cover and the water a chance to refresh themselves. Along the way, he instructed her to observe the land carefully, to notice small details like footprints, broken branches, or distant smoke. She had become adept at noticing these things, and Jacob admired her growing awareness and quick thinking. Once they reached the trees, they rested by the riverbank. Ahuli knelt and dipped her hands into the cool water, letting it wash over her face and arms. The sensation was refreshing, almost healing, and she closed her eyes, savoring the simple pleasure of it. Jacob watched her quietly, understanding that this moment of peace was as important as any measure of safety. They had survived the most dangerous part of the journey, but the road ahead was still uncertain. After a short rest, they continued along the river, moving slowly and carefully. The sounds of flowing water, rustling leaves, and distant birdsong accompanied them, creating a rhythm that was both calming and grounding. Jacob spoke occasionally, pointing out landmarks, describing patterns in the clouds, or telling brief stories of his life on the frontier. Ahuli listened, her mind absorbing each word, not just as information, but as a connection to another human being who had shown her care and protection. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a small clearing where the river bent gently, forming a natural pool. Jacob motioned for Ahuli to sit while he surveyed the area. From this vantage point, he could see signs of movement in the distance, likely travelers or hunters, but they were far enough away that there was no immediate threat. He felt a cautious sense of relief. Ahuli turned to him, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and curiosity. "Jacob," she said softly, "we've come so far, and yet I feel like I've just begun to understand what it means to be free." Jacob nodded, his expression serious but gentle. "Freedom isn't just walking without chains. It's knowing you can make choices, that you can protect yourself, and that you have someone you can trust. You have that now, Ahuli." She looked at him, a quiet intensity in her gaze. "I do, because of you. Because you believed in me, guided me, and protected me when no one else would. I've never known kindness like this before." Jacob felt a weight in his chest, a mix of admiration, respect, and something deeper that he did not yet fully understand. "You've earned it," he said softly. "You are strong, brave, and clever. All I did was help you see that strength for yourself." For a while, they sat in silence, letting the sounds of the river and the forest fill the space between them. Ahuli's thoughts drifted, reflecting on the long journey, the dangers they had faced, and the quiet moments of connection they had shared. She realized that her feelings for Jacob had grown beyond gratitude. There was respect, admiration, and an undeniable sense of trust that had evolved into something more profound. Finally, she turned to him, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "Jacob, from the moment you freed me, I felt something I cannot explain. I know this may sound strange, but I believe you will be my husband." Jacob froze for a moment, caught off guard by her words. His mind raced, thinking of the journey they had undertaken, the bond that had formed, and the respect and care that had grown between them. He looked into her eyes and saw the honesty, the courage, and the unwavering trust she had placed in him. There was no doubt in her voice, no hesitation, only certainty. He took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of surprise, relief, and something he could not quite name. "Ahuli," he said softly, I didn't expect that, but I feel the same. You are remarkable, brave, and kind. I cannot imagine leaving you behind or facing the world without you by my side." A smile spread across her face, radiant and full of warmth. The tension that had lingered since the beginning of their journey seemed to melt away. In that moment, they both understood that their lives had changed forever, not just because of survival, but because of the bond that had formed between them. They spent the rest of the day resting by the river, talking about the future, and imagining a life together. They spoke of the challenges they might face, the ways they could honor her heritage and his life on the frontier, and the dreams they each held for a life of freedom and partnership. Jacob shared stories of the land, the animals, and the people he had met, while Ahuli spoke of her family, her village, and the traditions she held dear. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the valley, Jacob and Ahuli prepared to leave the river and continue toward a more permanent, safe place. The bond between them had grown stronger, rooted in shared experience, trust, and the deep respect they had for one another. Each step they took together now carried a sense of purpose and hope, not just for survival, but for the life they could build together. The journey was not over, but the fear that had dominated their lives had begun to fade. Where once Ahuli had felt hopeless and alone, she now felt confident and supported. And where once Jacob had acted out of duty and instinct, he now acted out of care and devotion. Together they moved forward, their steps synchronized, their hearts connected in a way that neither had expected but both welcomed fully. As night fell, they found a small, secluded hill overlooking the valley. They made a fire, sharing a simple meal, and sat together watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The air was filled with the quiet sounds of the night, rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, and the soft murmur of the river far below. It was a moment of peace, a pause in the journey, and a recognition of how far they had come. Ahuli leaned against Jacob, feeling the warmth of his presence. "I feel safe with you," she said quietly. "I feel complete in a way I never have before." Jacob wrapped his arm around her gently, a protective and reassuring gesture. "And you will always be safe with me," he said. "No matter what comes, we face it together." They spoke little after that, allowing the night to surround them with quiet calm. Sleep eventually took them, but not before a sense of hope and promise settled between them. The long journey of danger, fear, and uncertainty had led them to this point, not just to survival, but to connection, trust, and love. When morning arrived, they rose with renewed determination. The valley below was bathed in the golden light of dawn, and the path ahead seemed filled with possibilities rather than obstacles. Jacob led the way, confident in the journey, while Ahuli followed, her trust and love in him unwavering. Together they walked forward, two souls bound by courage, trust, and the promise of a new life. The story of that day, the day Jacob freed Ahuli and the day she declared, "You will be my husband," was not just about survival. It was about respect, trust, and the quiet but powerful beginnings of love. The trials they had faced had forged a bond that could not be broken, a bond built on shared experience, mutual respect, and the courage to face the unknown together. As they rode into the open plains, side by side, the sun rose fully above the horizon, casting light across the land. For the first time, both Jacob and Ahuli felt a sense of peace, freedom, and hope for the future. They had survived, they had trusted, and they had found in each other something rare and precious. A partner for life, a companion for the journey, and a heart that could be trusted fully. And so the cowboy and the Apache woman continued on their path together toward a future of safety, love, and endless possibility. A life no longer defined by fear, but by courage, connection, and the quiet certainty of being together.